Welcome to RealtyCast Global, where we bring insights and advice from top professionals in the global market. Join us for a journey of culture and real estate from countries across the globe. My guest today is Michael Cobb. Michael, I so appreciate you being here with us and appreciate your time. We'll be doing 3 episodes with Michael, and we're going to start the first one on a consumer resource guide that he published several years ago. But I first need to have a little bit more information about you. You've had an incredible background. Going through all the material that you sent me, it was unbelievable to think that you had a job in the computer industry in the 90s, just as things were taking off, and you left that job to go to Central America and start a brand new business. I did. First, let me say this. Michael is the co-founder and CEO of ECI Development. And then if you'll get into that, tell us about the development company and about your jumping off in 1996 into this new venture. I think the public here would love to hear what you have to say about that.
Well, sure. Hugh, thanks for having me on your podcast. We just recently got to know one another, which is so fascinating because we've both been pounding around NAR and FIABC for a long time, and finally we were introduced, and I think it was a great meeting of the minds. So thank you for having me on today, and going all the way back. Yeah, I got out of college in 1986 and moved to the DC area, Northern Virginia. And I had a poli-sci, I majored in poli-sci. So I had a poli-sci degree, and I don't know what you do with that, nothing really, unless you want to be a lawyer, and I didn't want to be a lawyer. So I got into sales, and very fortuitously, I just ended up in computer sales, but even more so on the PC side of things, right? Because this was 1986. I mean, mainframes were still out there, minis were still out there, but I ended up on the PC side. Again, very fortuitous because we know over the next decade, mainframes and minis pretty much went the way of the dinosaurs, and PCs obviously were fully ascendant. And so very fortunate. So from 86 to 98, I was in the computer business in the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area. But somewhere around early 93, it might have been late 92, early 93, I was invited to go to a country called Belize. So a buddy of mine who did become a lawyer, he was a poli-sci major, we went to college together. He calls me up on a Tuesday. I never forget. I'm sitting at my desk, Springfield, Virginia. I get this phone call from Joel. He says, "Hey, Cobster, what are you doing this weekend?" Yeah, college fraternity name, right? Anyway, hey,
absolutely.
Cobster, what are you doing this weekend? I said, "I don't know." Why? He says, "Do you want to go to Belize?" I'm like, "Absolutely." Now, this is 1983 or 1993. Sorry, 1993. There's no Google, right? So I'm sitting there, I'm talking to him, I'm scratching my head, Belize. I had no idea where Belize was, right? Anyway, so finally I have to fess up. I'm like, now where are we going again? And where is that? So went to Belize, had a phenomenal time. I said, "Dude, the next time you're coming down, I'd like to come again," and so a month or two later, he's headed back down. I go with him, and we ended up buying a couple condos. This was like March, April of 93. And so what was interesting is that the developer there had built 44 condos around a pool facing the ocean. He'd started his second, horseshoe shape of condos just where we bought. And really through the end of that year, nothing was happening, Hugh, nothing. Like there was a building that was kind of halfway up. There was one with the foundation was a hole in the ground. We never saw any workers over that, like 6, 7, 8 months through the end of 93. And so we were talking to the developer one day, we're over by the pool. "Hey, Jim, what's the deal? Why aren't you finishing?" He said, because I'm carrying all this paper. I had to finance all of these sales. We're like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Yeah, your bank up there in D.C. or Pittsburgh, they're not lending you money to buy a condo in Belize. And the banks down here aren't lending, foreigners money. So I have to finance almost all of my sales." So my business partner, then friend, but now business partner, and I, we put our heads together and we started a little mortgage company, Hugh. This was end of 93, going into 94. And And we said, look, if we can go out, and I went out to a bunch of my buddies in the computer business. He went out to a bunch of his clients, and we raised a couple $1,000,000, right? And we started going down. We started buying paper from the developers, right? We didn't originate loans. We just bought paper. It was a great business. We had to do a second round, friends and family. We started to tap out on money, maybe raise another $1.5 million or something. Then we were just stuck, right? We just couldn't raise any more money on the sort of that friends and family circle. So we ended up taking our mortgage company, applying for a banking license, and we actually got our banking license. It took another 6-7 years. We got our banking license in 2003. But in the meantime, so I'm getting to the development side here real quick. I know but like when I was doing the inspection, Joel's a lawyer. He's doing all the legal deal, money kind of stuff. I'm doing the inspections of the property, and I would walk into these condos and homes, and there'd be countertops that were too high or too low, a light in the bathroom that was behind instead of over top of the mirror, right? Door handles at different heights. And I remember one home that I walked into, it was a condo actually, where in the living room, there was one outlet on one wall, and they had plugged in two power strips, plugged extension cords into the power strips to get power all the way around this living room out of one outlet, right? And Joel and I just got our heads together, and we're like, man, like to fix most of this stuff is free or next to free, right? A few more outlets, whatever. But I mean, countertops at the right height, mirrors in the right places, door handles, whatever the standards are, right? And we said, this was now 95 going into 96. And we're like, you know what? We could fix all of these problems for almost free and deliver a product that a North American consumer would want and expect. And that was the genesis of our development company. And in 1996, we started ECI Development. And in 98, it was going so well that, yes, I left the computer industry and went full time into this business. But it really started as a service, right? First on the financing side, there was a hole in the marketplace. How can we fill a need that's not being served? And then on the development side, how could we serve a need that was being not served very well? How could we serve it better? And so that's really the heart of service, right? It's always been sort of me a Zig Ziglar. Like if we help enough other people get what they want, we can have what we want. And so, the genesis of our business really comes out of that service mentality. Yeah.
I think that's a great story. And here's the thing. You didn't set out to do the development work to begin with.
No.
You got there. You saw that there was a problem or a crisis with that individual that had basically stopped because he'd tapped out on his money.
Yep.
And you tried to take care of that service. And in doing that, you discovered a whole new world. Who would have thought you would have been a developer at that point in time?
Certainly not me.
I mean, what a great story. And you have so much wisdom also. I mean, in looking through, we will have 3 different episodes here. And we're going to touch on Belize the next episode, and then we're going to get into another section a little bit later. Okay. But so many people have misconceptions. They have a beautiful dream about moving into another country. They romanticize that dream, yep. But the reality hits when they hit the ground and when they're in the country trying to figure these things out. So I think you can be a great pocket of wisdom for people that are watching this podcast and people that want to know more about the how-tos, the nuts and bolts about moving to another country, because you don't just jump in, but you have to have assistance. And there's something you said, I can't think of exactly what it was, but I think it's we don't know what we don't know.
Yes.
And that's pretty profound, really, because we don't know what we don't know. And that's why it's so important to have someone we can lean on that's been there. And in your case, since 1996, that's been there, that understands, and you know how. You know how to make the dream come true.
Well, thank you, Hugh. I appreciate those really kind words. And a big part of these lessons that we put into the Consumer Resource Guide were lessons that, I and we as a company paid a lot of tuition to learn, right? I mean, these weren't free lessons. I mean, we banged around. Like you said, what did I know about development in 1996? Not much, right? I mean, I'd stayed in developments, right? That's kind of what I knew. And so we made a lot of mistakes over the years, but we documented those and we turned them into lessons, right? We paid the tuition, and so then we turned them into lessons, and then we put those lessons into the consumer resource guide to hopefully, help other folks coming along, avoid the ones that we made. Everybody makes mistakes. I think that's just part of life, right? You make mistakes, but if we can take the big, huge potholes off the road, or fill those in at least, or at least point where they are, and we can avoid those. Our goal, again, coming back to this idea of service, look, we give away our consumer resource guide, literally thousands and thousands every year. We give them away any chance we get, and we don't get thousands and thousands of sales every year. But I hope that the people who get them, whether they buy one of our properties or buy somebody else's property, actually have a much happier experience. Like you said, the romanticized vision really can come true to a large degree, because it is wonderful to live in the tropics. It is wonderful to live where the cost of living is much lower and the quality of life can be much higher, right? I mean, this romanticized notion can largely be true if we take care of some of those details on the front end, right? And so every time an expat, let me just use the word expat, every time an expat happily transitions to a new location, whether in one of our communities or in the vast number of cases, somebody else's community, right? At the end of the day, the world of expats gets better. People talk about this wonderful experience, and it is truly the rising tide, right? If we can help more people have a successful transition into an expat lifestyle or a vacation property or even an investment property ownership, because those two elements also hang in the mix, right? It's not just the full-timer expats, it's people who buy a vacation property or an investment property. But when that transaction happens wonderfully and successfully, and then on the backside, much of that romanticized vision comes to pass, wow, what a wonderful experience that is for everybody. And when that tide lifts, we're going to get our piece of that business somewhere down the line too. So yeah, we're very happy to distribute this consumer resource guide widely and broadly and help as many folks, see the big potholes, right? And by the way, you mentioned we don't know what we don't know. There is a corollary to that, and it's that we also have to forget what we think we know, right? So it's both. We don't know what we don't know, but we also have to discard assumptions that we bring with us, because many assumptions that we have coming out of North America just simply don't hold water, outside of North America.
Exactly. Michael, you mentioned the resource guide, the consumer resource guide, and I think it's great that you prepared that, because it answers a lot of questions that people might have when they're thinking about making that big move. And it's a big move to invest in another country. But at the very bottom in the episode description area, we will have your information, your website, all of your information at the very bottom, and people can actually email you and ask for this consumer resource guide, which is really like a Bible to that country, basically, or not necessarily that country, but to Central America or any other country that you would be moving to.
Right. Well, I would say that the consumer resource guide works anywhere in the developing world, whether it's Latin America, Asia, Africa, it doesn't matter. The developing world is a foreign, different environment. And so this consumer resource guide, what it really helps us do, Hugh, is it helps us begin to think differently. Like, we have 15 questions, right? And the 15 questions are not even close to exhaustive of all the possible things that can be out there, right? But if we take those 15 questions and we begin to go, okay, I see why, this is an important thing, I see why we're asking this question. So if we can understand the why of it, then we can come up with our own 15 more or our own 30 more. Sure. Or because a lot of it's very situational, right? We're down there, we're on the ground, we're looking at it, and we might go, like, we might come up with a whole different question or a couple questions that had nothing to do with anything we ever thought of before, but they're situational and they're relevant in the moment, right? So really what I hope, and I talk about this in the consumer resource guide early on and sort of the prep for it, right, is to say, hey, this is really a document to help us change how we think, because we are leaving from North America, Northern Europe, we are leaving the land of seller beware, right? There are so many consumer protection laws, regulation, agencies, private organizations, Ralph Nader, right? I mean, he didn't work for the government, he had his own, right? I mean, so you have all of these organizations, institutions, people that are looking out for the consumer in North America. It's really hard to stick it to the consumer. It's not that it doesn't happen, but it's hard. I mean, it happens once in a while. But when you go to buyer beware, where you don't have the regulatory compliance, you might not even have the regulations. You don't have the regulations. You don't have the compliance. Many of the times the countries might have the regulations, but they don't have the resources to enforce them, right? So you've got a whole different environment, which is buyer beware. And so again, if we can change how we think, right, we can then be in this environment in a much more prepared status, right? We become prepared and we become aware of things around us that we would normally assume. Again, that assumption thing, that's why that's dangerous, right? And some of the questions have to do with assumptions, and then some have to do more with, we just don't know what we don't know.
Exactly. Well, I think also in your guide, it stimulates those 15 questions. Actually, the person looking at those questions and trying to answer those because they're thinking seriously about moving and investing in other countries, it helps them to be able to think maybe beyond the curve a little bit so that they understand more about what they don't know. But let me ask you this. I know that common mistakes are made, but in your opinion, what are the most common mistakes that people make that made 20 years ago? People made these mistakes 20 years ago compared to common mistakes today in investing or building in other countries.
Wow, Hugh, no one has ever asked me that question before. A lot of times I kind of walk into this stuff very prepared because most of the questions I've had before, never had that one before. Thank you. Well done. Let me ponder that one just a moment and just start with a very specific example and then see where it goes. But, I would say that the common mistake that people make is they go too fast. Right? They rush into things. I would say almost all of the problems stem from rushing into something as opposed to taking their time. And if we look at how people buy real estate in the U.S., most people, I would say wise people, they go out and they get a realtor, right? Not everybody, but most people get a realtor to represent them, become their representative in something that on the surface might not seem so hard. I'm just buying a house, right? But it's not like buying tomatoes, right? I mean, we're buying a house. There's a lot of stuff that goes on with that. And so most people end up hiring a realtor. When we go overseas, many people just simply, they don't hire a realtor. They don't get a realtor. They just go straight to a seller, straight to a developer, and they, purchase a property, right? And they do it on the same trip, their first trip. And I think that tends to be, if I had to isolate sort of the root cause of most of the problems, it's not the problems themselves, but it's the root cause is moving too quickly into a situation and doing so without good guidance. Okay. I don't know that it's changed very much yet, but I actually think that it is in the process of changing significantly. And that is NAR. Back in, I guess it was 2011 or 12. I don't remember when it was. I was invited under, whenever Steve Brown was president, it was Steve Brown's initiative, a presidential advisory group. He invited 12 of us up to Chicago for a week to talk about how to improve NAR's global positioning, right? And Janet Branton was the VP at Global and Commercial at the time. So went up there and I think there was this real desire on the part of NAR to build a global, a stronger global presence, right? And a global interaction. Forget the presence part, but the interaction part. And I've watched that happen since 2012. I ended up on the board of NAR for a year and then served on a couple of the committees and I've attended lots of events. And so I have watched this progression of NAR's engagement with the global community. And a big one, which I think is very, very exciting, is the actual desire. It's not foolproof, but the desire to enforce the licensing of the agents overseas, and then the listing of properties in the US. I'm getting into the weeds here a little bit, but let me just back out of the weeds and just come to the big picture. The bottom line of that is this, that there's more realtor presence overseas now than there ever has been before, and that realtor presence is being respected both in that country and by their own licensing authorities, right? And by NAR. And that combination of the two is driving more people to use a realtor when they buy property overseas. And I would say that of the things that have changed the most, that's probably a big one. It's still largely a buyer beware environment. That hasn't changed. And the other thing that's probably changed too, Hugh, is there's more awareness of a North American consumer. And so I think there's more awareness of building a product that's comfortable and familiar for a North American consumer. So I think the trends are in the right direction, for sure. And I don't know if I answered your question or not.
No, you did. You certainly did. And I do know that NAR has moved forward in a great force to reach out into these other countries and bring that NAR presence, have the code of ethics there for those agents. And it's a huge undertaking, but they're doing a great job at it.
They are. And you know what? It'll take 20, 30 years, and we're 10, 15 years into it, right? So, yeah, right.
That's true.
Yep.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you another question. What are the pros and cons of building in another country versus buying a home that's already built?
Let me start real easy. Typically, on a home that's already built, you're going to get a much better a cost per square foot, right? So, because if somebody built a house, 30 years ago and it costs, $30 a square foot, they can sell it today for $100 a square foot and they're happy, and right. Whereas today, the cost to build a house overseas, by the way, this is kind of an interesting misnomer. The cost to build overseas in the developing world is only slightly less than the cost to build in the U.S. because concrete, steel, nobody builds. In Latin America, it's all concrete, so we don't even talk about wood, right? But concrete, steel, doors, windows, electric wire, faucets, lights, everything like that is all priced at the world price. There's no discount on concrete and steel in Costa Rica because it's world price, right? And so labor is the only variable in the cost of construction where you actually can save money. So again, new construction in the US, Canada, new construction overseas is pretty comparable. It might be 10 to 15% less overseas, but it's not significantly less. The land piece, again, if you buy a lot looking at the ocean in, say, I like Nicaragua, right? An oceanfront lot in Nicaragua for, $150,000, $250,000. Same thing in California would be, $2 million, right? So we're talking 10 cents on the dollar, right? Costa Rica might be, $300,000, $400,000. So, again, different price points. But then when you come to build a new house, you're only going to be 10, 15% less than what it would cost in the States. However, this is where it gets really cool. And again, this is where again, paying a lot of attention up front counts, because if the things that cost a lot of money in the States, high labor items, so a mosaic tile floor, iron work, just all kinds of detailing that would just take craftsmen hours and hours and hours at some outrageous, $50 an hour or whatever to do. In Latin America, that stuff is inexpensive. It's just insanely inexpensive. And so what you can end up with is a house that would cost, 3 times more in the States because of all the craftsmanship that's gone into this really high labor component. But if you were to just say build a 1,500 square foot house, tile, right, in the States and in Latin America, your cost to be 15% less. But if you start to get smart about it and build something really cool and sexy and craftsy, right, now all of a sudden you're going to have a house that would cost double or triple that in the States. And that's because of the labor component. So there's where you really start to pick up your advantage. The one disadvantage of buying a pre-existing home is you don't necessarily know how well it was engineered. And depending on where you purchase the home, on the Pacific side of central Mexico all the way down to Chile, that is the ring of fire. that is the same fault. It's not exactly the same fault line as, California, but it's basically the same fault system from Alaska to Chile, right? And so you have earthquakes, that whole western side of the Americas. And so if you buy a structure that's already built, you can have them break away the walls and stuff like that. And in fact, I think in an earthquake zone, if I was buying a home that already existed, I probably would do that because I would want to know that house would stand up to a major earthquake, because they get them. I mean, that's just like, it's on the Pacific coast, right? So if you build new and you hire, and we recommend this in the Consumer Resource Guide, and you hire your own third-party engineer to validate the plans and then do construction inspections to make sure it's actually being built according to the plans, right? Then you know that you're going to get a house that will hold up to an earthquake, right? Same thing on the other side, right? On the Caribbean side, I mean, you've got hurricanes, right? And so you want to make sure that whatever structures you're building there, accommodate Cat 4, maybe Cat 5, whatever. People have different opinions on that, but a Cat 4, Cat 5 kind of hurricane type of structure. So the engineering on those is important. Far more important on the seismic side for a pre-existing home, because you just don't know unless you break away walls and really see what's behind it. So anyway, but you'll get a much lower price on a pre-built home. So it might make sense to take the lower price and bust away some walls and really check the construction standards on it. Yeah.
We're running out of time, but I have one more question about
Okay.
It's kind of a crazy question. It's about a personality type perspective, but then we'll be moving into our second podcast with you shortly, and that will be about Belize. We'll concentrate on Belize. But my question is this: from a personality perspective, what people would you not advise to move to Central America?
I love it. So in the Consumer Resource Guide, which you're going to put a link to, right here on page 4, it's right inside, is this what we call Are You Ready to Live Overseas quiz, okay? And I mean, just a couple of the questions. Are you usually one of the first to try new things, new food, and new experiences? That's a question. 1, 2, or 3, right? And it's a point system. Are you able to relax, willing to adapt to a lower, slower, easier life pace? Do you make new friends easily? Are you open to adventures and new activities? Right. I mean, so there's I think 15 questions there or something, 12, 15 questions, and you just rank them 1, 2, 3. And so what I have found is that this little quiz has been the best predictor of people who will make it overseas with very little adjustments, whatever. Everybody gets culture shock, right? Everybody gets culture shock. How well do you deal with culture shock? That's what this quiz says. And like 1 point, what are you waiting for? Go ahead. Kind of the middle range. Yeah, you're going to bump along, but you're going to get through it. The people who score low on this, like, just stay home. You're going to be miserable. Like, it is just not, it's not the right thing for you. So that quiz is a lot of fun, and it is so powerfully predictive, better than anything I've seen in 27 years of my career. Highly predictive. Yeah.
I think you did a great job on that quiz, and I haven't taken it yet, but I promise I will. I promise I will sometime in the near future.
Okay.
Listen, it's been great being with you today. And again, I thank you for your time. I thank you for what you've done. I see you as an individual you ventured out into uncharted waters, basically, for you. Yeah. You got out of your comfort zone. You went to one location in Central America and you saw a need. And you provided a service, and that service grew into another opportunity. And I think you're the total package. I think you're excellent in what you've done. I've heard a lot of wonderful things about you, your company, and I think that anyone listening to this podcast, if they have any questions about Central America, you're the man they should contact.
Well, thank you. And I hope that folks will reach out for the Consumer Resource Guide, because that is a very, very valuable tool that everybody looking for property overseas should have in their hands. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. We appreciate you. Goodbye. Thanks for joining in on today's episode of RealtyCast Global. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast to be notified when new episodes air.